The emergency alarm blared through the small farming community of Haven's Rest. It was a sound no one had heard in over 15 years. Red lights flashed in every home, every shop, and every public space on the quiet agricultural world. Jack Hayes was in his garden when he heard it. He stood up slowly, his knees cracking with the movement. Soil fell from his weathered hands as he looked to the sky. He had known this day might come. A small part of him had been waiting for it. Inside his modest home, a message flashed on his old communications unit. The screen had been dark for so long he had almost forgotten it existed. The message was brief. Krenthak attacking New Montana colony. All veterans requested. Critical situation. Transport arriving in 1 hour. Jack stared at the screen for several long seconds. Then, without hesitation, he walked to his bedroom closet. Behind his everyday clothes and farming gear was a hidden panel. He placed his palm against it, and after a moment, it slid open. Inside was a simple metal case, sealed and untouched for years. 5 miles away, Mary Winters lowered her mug of tea when she heard the alarm. She had been teaching her granddaughter how to play chess. The little girl looked confused, but Mary just smiled gently. "I need to go away for a little while," she said. She kissed the girl's forehead and walked calmly to her study. Like Jack, she had a hidden compartment, this one beneath a loose floorboard under her desk. The case she pulled out was longer and thinner than Jack's. Across the river, in the community school, George Franklin was explaining crop rotation to a group of students when the alarm sounded. The children jumped in surprise, but George remained perfectly still, as if he had been expecting the sound. He dismissed the class with unusual authority, his normally gentle voice suddenly firm and clear. "School is canceled for today. Go straight. I home." The children, sensing the change in their teacher, obeyed without question. In the colony's engineering workshop, Linda Powell set down her welding tool with deliberate care. She had been helping build a new irrigation system. When the alarm sounded, the other engineers looked confused and worried. Linda did not. She simply removed her work gloves, nodded to her colleagues, and walked out without a word. All 4 veterans converged on the colony's small spaceport an hour later. They carried their sealed cases and small bags with personal items. They had not changed into uniforms. They wore simple civilian clothes. Yet anyone who saw them walking toward the landing pad felt a strange chill. Something about the way they moved was different from the other colonists. They did not hurry, but their steps were somehow more direct, more certain. They did not speak much as they waited for the transport. They had known each other for decades. Words had long ago become mostly unnecessary between them. "New Montana," George finally said, breaking the silence. "Mining colony, rich in rare minerals, strategic location." Mary nodded. 3,000 miles of rough terrain. Multiple settlement clusters. Linda tapped her fingers against her case. Poor defensive infrastructure. They never expected to be a target. Jack said nothing. He just watched the sky. The transport that arrived was small and unmarked. It landed silently, its engines barely disturbing the air. The pilot who emerged was young, wearing the uniform of the Colonial Defense Force. His eyes widened slightly when he saw the 4 older civilians waiting for him. "You're the veterans?" he asked, his voice betraying his doubt. Jack finally spoke. "Yes, we're ready to leave." The pilot hesitated. "I was told I would be picking up elite combat specialists." Mary smiled faintly. "You were told correctly. Let's not waste time." As they boarded the transport, the pilot couldn't help but stare. Jack's hair was gray, his face lined with age. Mary walked with a slight limp. George had the soft hands of a teacher. Linda looked like someone's kind grandmother. Once they were seated, the pilot engaged the launch sequence and opened a briefing file on the main screen. "New Montana has been under siege for 3 days, he explained, showing them images of the Krenthak fleet in orbit around the colony. "Our regular forces have been pushed back to the central settlement. The mining outposts have already fallen." The veterans studied the images in silence. The Krenthak ships were massive, their design alien and threatening. The aliens have better weapons, Better shields and better tactical systems than anything we've developed. The pilot continued. They've conquered 6 colonies in the past year alone. No one has been able to stop them. Jack exchanged glances with the others. We've faced worse odds, he said quietly. The pilot looked skeptical, but didn't argue. As the transport left the atmosphere, he activated the faster-than-light drive. The stars outside the viewport stretched into lines as they accelerated. It will take us 18 hours to reach New Montana, the pilot said. You should rest while you can. The veterans nodded but made no move toward the sleeping quarters. Instead, they opened their cases for the first time in years. From his case, Jack removed what looked like ordinary gloves. Only someone with specialized knowledge would notice the nearly invisible circuitry woven into the fabric. Mary's case contained an old rifle that seemed almost primitive compared to modern weapons. She began checking its components with practiced efficiency. George pulled out a small device that resembled a simple calculator. When he activated it, however, complex holographic displays appeared above it, showing battlefield simulations. Linda's case held tools that looked more suited for construction than combat. Her fingers moved over them with familiar affection. The pilot watched in confusion. That's your equipment? Those things look ancient. They're exactly what we need, Linda replied without looking up. As the ship hurtled through space, Jack gazed out the viewport. He thought about the peaceful life he had built, the garden he had tended that morning, the neighbors who knew him only as a quiet farmer. He thought about how that life would seem like a dream in the coming days. He thought about New Montana and the people there, facing an enemy they couldn't hope to defeat. He remembered what it was like to fight against impossible odds, to do things that shouldn't be possible. He flexed his fingers inside the special gloves. They still fit perfectly. We should discuss strategy, George said, activating his tactical display. The holographic images showed the layout of New Montana's main settlement. The 4 veterans gathered around the display. To an observer, they might have looked like ordinary older people examining a map. Nothing about them suggested they were anything special. But in 18 hours, the Krenthak would learn differently. In 18 hours, everything would change. The transport ship emerged from faster-than-light travel with a gentle shudder. Through the viewport, New Montana came into view. It was a rocky world with patches of engineered forests surrounding the human settlements. In orbit above the planet, the massive Krenthak ships loomed like dark predators. We'll have to use the emergency approach, the pilot said, his voice tense. The main spaceport is under alien control. Jack nodded. Take us in through the southern mountain range. Low and quiet. The pilot looked surprised. How did you know about that route? It's not on any official charts. We know many things, Mary said simply. The transport dipped into the planet's atmosphere. The pilot guided it skillfully between jagged mountain peaks, keeping close to the terrain to avoid Krenthak scanners. After 20 minutes of careful navigation, they approached a small landing pad hidden in a narrow valley. Secondary port for emergency supplies, George explained. Every mining colony has one. When they landed, a woman in a colonial defense force uniform was waiting for them. Commander Susan Miller looked exhausted. Dark circles ringed her eyes, and her uniform was stained with dirt and what might have been blood. You're the Special Forces team they sent? She asked, her voice flat with disappointment as the 4 older civilians walked down the ramp. Jack extended his hand. Jack Hayes. This is Mary Winters, George Franklin, and Linda Powell. We're the response team. Miller shook his hand weakly. I requested elite combat specialists. We're fighting for our lives here. We understand the situation, Jack replied calmly. Take us to your command center. Miller hesitated, then seemed to give up arguing. Follow me. We don't have much time. The Krenthak are preparing for another push. They drove through a series of underground tunnels in a small electric vehicle. The tunnels had been mining shafts once, now converted to emergency transport routes. Occasionally, they passed groups of frightened civilians huddled together in side chambers. We've evacuated as many people as we could from the outer settlements, Miller explained. 3,000 civilians in spaces meant for a few hundred. Food and water won't last long. None of the veterans commented. They watched everything with alert eyes, taking in details that others might miss. The command center was a large cave that had been equipped with military computer systems and communications gear. Maps and tactical displays covered the walls. About 20 Colonial Defense Force officers worked at various stations, their faces grim. Miller called for attention. "These people have been sent to assist us," she announced, gesturing to the 4 veterans. The officers looked up, and Jack could see the same disappointment in their eyes that he had seen in Miller's. "What's our status?" George asked, moving directly to the main tactical display. A young officer stepped forward. "The Krenthak hold the spaceport and the northern mining complex. They've established 3 forward bases here, here, and here." He pointed to locations on the map. "We've got defensive positions around the central settlement, but our weapons barely dent their armor. They have some kind of energy shield technology." Linda moved closer to examine the display. "What's your power infrastructure like?" The officer looked confused. "We have the main generator in the central settlement and backup systems in these locations." "Why?" "I'll need access to your engineering systems," Linda said, "and a team of people who know the colony's electrical grid." Miller frowned. "We're fighting for survival and you want to look at our power grid?" "Yes," Linda replied simply. Mary had moved to a different display that showed the terrain around the colony. "I need the highest elevation point with a clear view of the northern approach," she said. Another officer pointed to a spot on the map. "There's an old observation post here, but it's of no tactical value. The Krenthak warriors have personal shields. Sniper positions are useless." Mary nodded. "I'll need transportation there." Jack turned to Miller. "When is the next Krenthak attack expected?" "Our intel suggests they'll move at dawn," Miller replied. "About 6 hours from now. They're bringing in their heavy assault platforms." "Good," Jack said. "That gives us time." Miller's frustration was visible. "Time for what? You haven't even told us your plan or what kind of specialist you are." George looked up from the tactical display. "We're what you asked for, Commander. Veterans." "Veterans of what?" Miller demanded. "You look like you should be in retirement homes, not on a battlefield." For the first time, a faint smile crossed Jack's face. "We fought in wars your history books don't mention, Commander. Now we need to prepare." The 4 veterans split up, each focused on their tasks. Linda gathered a team of engineers and disappeared into the colony's maintenance tunnels. Mary collected a small pack of supplies and left with a guide for the observation post. George remained in the command center, studying the defensive positions and making small adjustments to the placement of troops. Jack walked alone through the tunnels, observing the frightened civilians and the young, nervous soldiers. He stopped occasionally to speak quietly with squad leaders, giving them simple instructions that seemed odd but specific. Commander Miller followed him, her frustration growing. "My people are dying," she said finally. "I need to know what you're planning." Jack stopped and turned to her. "Your regular tactics won't work against the Krenthak. They've seen them before. They expect them. And you have something better?" Miller asked skeptically. "We have something different," Jack replied. "Sometimes that's enough." In the engineering section, Linda was making modifications to the colony's power distribution system. The local engineers watched in confusion as she rerouted critical systems in ways that violated standard safety protocols. "This will create power surges in sections 3 through 7, one engineer protested. "Yes, it will," Linda agreed, continuing her work. At the observation post, Mary unpacked her old rifle. The Colonial Defense Force soldier who had guided her watched curiously. "That weapon is ancient," he commented. "Our latest rifles can't penetrate." "Krenthak armor. What makes you think that one can?" Mary didn't answer. She simply began making careful adjustments to her scope, her weathered hands steady and precise. In the command center, George had created a new defensive strategy that left several approaches to the colony seemingly undefended. "This is suicide," one of the officers argued. "You're creating gaps in our line." "They're not gaps," George replied calmly. "They're invitations." As dawn approached, Jack returned to the command center. He found Miller staring at the tactical display, her expression torn between hope and despair. "Your people are in position," she said, "but I still don't understand how 4 aging veterans are going to change anything against an enemy that has overwhelmed every defense we've thrown at them." Jack stood beside her, looking at the display showing the Krenthak forces massing for their attack. "Commander," he said quietly, "have you ever seen a storm front hit a mountain range? How everything seems calm until the moment of impact, and then everything changes in seconds." Miller looked at him, confusion in her eyes. "Watch," Jack said, his voice steady as the first alarms began to sound. "You're about to see exactly that." The first light of dawn broke over the mountains of New Montana. In the alien ships above, the Krenthak prepared for what they expected would be a simple victory. They had faced human defenses before. Their algorithms had calculated every possible human response. They knew exactly what to expect. Inside the main Krenthak vessel, war leader Krastul studied the tactical display. His forces had easily taken the outer settlements. Now they would crush the main colony and secure the valuable mining resources. The humans always fought the same way, with the same tactics. Predictable. Weak. "Begin the attack," Krastul ordered. "Standard formation." In the colony's command center, alarms sounded as sensors detected movement from the Krenthak positions. Commander Miller and her officers watched the tactical screens with grim expressions. "They're coming in force," one officer reported. "At least 2,000 warriors with support platforms." Miller glanced at George, who stood calmly by the main display. "Your defensive positions are in place," she said, doubt clear in her voice. "I hope you know what you're doing." George nodded. "Watch the eastern ridge," he said simply. The Krenthak warriors moved in perfect formation across the rocky terrain. Their armor gleamed in the morning light, energy shields creating a faint blue glow around each soldier. Behind them floated the heavy weapons platforms, massive discs that carried enough firepower to level the colony's defenses. Jack stood at a small outpost, watching the approaching aliens through old-fashioned binoculars. Next to him, a squad of 6 young Colonial Defense Force soldiers waited nervously. "Remember what I told you," Jack said. "Wait for my signal. Not before. Not after." The soldiers nodded, though they didn't understand why this old man's timing mattered so much. In the maintenance tunnels beneath the colony, Linda had finished her modifications to the power grid. She had positioned small teams of engineers at key junction points with simple instructions. "When I give the word, flip these switches in exact sequence," she told them. "The timing must be perfect." On the observation post high above the battlefield, Mary lay perfectly still behind her rifle. Through her scope, she watched the approaching alien forces. She counted silently, her breathing slow and controlled. The Krenthak reached the first defensive line. They met exactly what they expected, a standard Colonial Defense Force barrier with predictable weapon emplacements. Their forward units engaged, confident in their superior shields and firepower. But then something unexpected happened. Mary fired her first shot from the observation post. The ancient rifle made a sound unlike the modern weapons. The bullet, and the actual physical projectile, not an energy weapon, traveled along a path that should have been impossible according to standard ballistics. It struck a Krenthak officer at the exact point where the energy shield generator connected to the armor. The alien fell instantly. The Krenthak command structure registered confusion. Their sensors hadn't detected a threat from that position. Before they could recalibrate, Mary fired 5 more shots in rapid succession. 5 more command officers fell. In the command center, Miller stared at the display in disbelief. "How is she doing that? Their shields should stop any projectile." George didn't answer. He was focused on the eastern section of the battlefield. "Now," he said into his communicator. On the eastern ridge, Jack gave a hand signal to his small squad. They fired their weapons not at the Krenthak warriors, but at specific points on the rocky ground in front of them. The shots kicked up dust in a pattern that seemed random. But as the dust cloud formed, something strange happened to the Krenthak. Energy shields in that sector. The shields flickered and weakened. Linda's voice came through on the command channel. "Ready," she said. In the tunnels, Linda nodded to her engineers. They flipped the switches in sequence. Power surged through the colony's grid in a pattern that created a specific electromagnetic pulse. It was a pulse that, by all modern understanding, should have been harmless. But the Krenthak weapons platforms passing over that section of the battlefield suddenly lost altitude. Their control systems failed and they crashed to the ground. In the Krenthak command ship, alarms sounded. War leader Krastul stared at his displays in disbelief. "What is happening?" he demanded. "These are not standard human tactics." His subordinates had no answers. Their battle computers were trying to analyze the unexpected developments, but the humans were using methods that weren't in their database. On the battlefield, the Krenthak formation began to break apart. They had been driving forward in a precise pattern, but now gaps appeared in their lines. And into those gaps, the Colonial Defense Force troops moved exactly as George had positioned them. Miller watched the tactical display with growing amazement. "They're falling back," she whispered. "I've never seen the Krenthak retreat." George nodded. "They're confused. Their algorithms can't process what's happening." A Colonial Defense Force officer rushed into the command center. "Sir, the aliens are sending in their elite guard. They're heading straight for the command bunker." Miller paled. "The elite guard has never been defeated in ground combat." George touched his communicator. "Jack, they're sending the elite guard to the command bunker." "Understood," Jack's calm voice replied. The Krenthak elite guard moved with frightening speed toward the colony's central area. These warriors were larger than the others, their armor more advanced. They carried weapons that could cut through standard defenses like paper. Jack stood alone in the open area in front of the command bunker. He had removed his jacket and now wore only a simple shirt and pants. The special gloves still covered his hands. The Colonial Defense Force soldiers nearby looked at him in alarm. "Sir, you need to take cover," one shouted. "Those are elites coming." Jack didn't move. He stood relaxed, almost casual, as the 12 massive alien warriors approached. The lead Krenthak elite raised its weapon, targeting Jack. Then it paused, its sensory apparatus scanning the lone human. According to its threat assessment, this aging human posed no danger. Yet something about the man's stance triggered an alert in its combat systems. The alien fired. The energy bolt should have vaporized Jack instantly, but Jack wasn't there anymore. He had moved with impossible speed, stepping aside at the last moment, and then he was moving toward the aliens. In the command center, everyone stared at the video feed in shock. Jack Hayes, a man who appeared to be in his 60s, moved like nothing they had ever seen. He flowed between the massive aliens like water, his hands striking with precision at points on their armor that shouldn't have been vulnerable. 2 elite warriors fell in the first 5 seconds. 3 more in the next 10. The remaining aliens tried to form a defensive circle, but Jack was always where they didn't expect him to be. Miller turned to George, her eyes wide. "What is he?" George watched the screen calmly. "What we all are. The result of a program they don't teach you about in military history." Throughout the battlefield, the pattern repeated. Mary's impossible shots continued to eliminate key Krenthak commanders. Linda's power surges disabled alien technology that should have been immune to such simple tactics. The defensive positions George had established caught the Krenthak in crossfires they couldn't have predicted. And Jack, facing the cream of the alien military, moved like a ghost among them, his gloved hands finding weaknesses that no analysis had ever detected. In the Krenthak command ship, war leader Krastul ordered a full retreat for the first time in his long career. "These are not normal humans," he stated. "They do not fight according to any known pattern. We must withdraw and analyze this new threat." The Krenthak forces began to pull back, leaving behind more dead and disabled warriors than they had lost in all previous human encounters combined. In the colony's command center, stunned silence gave way to cautious celebration. But Commander Miller wasn't celebrating. She was watching George Franklin with new eyes. "Who are you people?" she asked, quietly. "Really?" George looked at her steadily. "Just veterans, Commander, from a war everyone tried to forget." The Krenthak retreat created a strange quiet over the battlefield. The Colonial Defense Force soldiers stared in disbelief at the alien warriors moving back toward their ships. No one had ever seen the Krenthak abandon a planned assault. Jack walked back to the command bunker, his movements now slow and deliberate. The soldiers who had witnessed his fight with the elite guard stepped aside as he passed, their expressions a mixture of awe and fear. He looked tired now, his face lined with exhaustion, but otherwise showed no signs of having just defeated 12 of the most dangerous warriors in known space. In the command center, Miller was questioning George with growing intensity. "I need answers," she insisted. "Those combat techniques aren't possible. The way Hayes moved, the shots Winters made, Powell's power disruptions, none of that should work against Krenthak technology." George sighed. The Krenthak base their tactics on analyzing patterns. They expect humans to fight according to established military doctrine. We don't. That's not an explanation, Miller pressed. The door opened, and Jack entered. He flexed, his fingers inside the special gloves wincing slightly. "They're regrouping," he said without preamble. "We have maybe 2 hours before they try again." Linda's voice came through on the comm. "Jack, I need to see you, Maintenance Section 3. Jack nodded to George and left without another word to Miller. As he walked through the tunnels, Colonial, citizens and soldiers alike stepped back to let him pass. Word had spread quickly about what had happened on the battlefield. In Maintenance Section 3, Linda was examining a captured Krenthak weapon. She looked up as Jack entered. "Their technology has evolved," she said. "The power signatures are more complex than the last time we faced them." Jack raised an eyebrow. "The last time?" "Proxima Centauri, 2138. The incident that was officially recorded as a mining accident." Linda adjusted her glasses. "These are the same species, but their tech has advanced." Jack nodded. "Can you continue to disrupt their systems?" "For now, but they'll adapt. They always do." Linda pointed to a display showing energy readings. "The next wave will have modified shields. Mary's shots won't penetrate so easily. Then we'll need to modify our approach too," Jack said. Mary joined them a few minutes later, her ancient rifle slung over her shoulder. Her face showed none of the strain that was evident on Jack's. 17 command officers eliminated, she reported. But they're changing their command structure, becoming more decentralized. George arrived last, carrying a data pad showing the battlefield map. "They're consolidating their forces here," he said, pointing to a location north of the colony. "Pulling in all their remaining troops for one massive push." The 4 veterans looked at each other. They had worked together for so long that much of their communication happened without words. "Option 3? Linda suggested. Jack considered, then shook his head. "Too many civilians nearby." "Option 5. Mary frowned. "Option 5 requires all 4 of us in exposed positions. It's our best chance to end this quickly," Jack replied. George nodded slowly. "I'll update the tactical positions." As the veterans discussed their plans, Commander Miller approached with 2 senior officers. She had clearly been listening. "Whatever you're planning, I need to know," she demanded. "These are my people you're risking." The veterans turned to face her. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Jack nodded. "You deserve to know. But what we tell you cannot go beyond this room." Miller hesitated, then dismissed her officers. When they were alone, she crossed her arms. "I'm listening." "Before the Colonial Defense Force, before the unification," George began, "Earth's nations fought wars using specialized soldiers." "Super soldiers?" Miller asked, her tone skeptical. "That's a myth." "Not super," Linda corrected. "Enhanced, specific modifications, not to make us stronger or faster, but to make us unpredictable. The Krenthak aren't the first alien species humanity has encountered," Jack explained. "Just the first one officially acknowledged. 50 years ago, there were incidents, first contact situations that went badly. The problem was tactical, predictability," Mary continued. Alien species with advanced technology could analyze human combat patterns and develop perfect countermeasures. Conventional forces always lost. So a program was created, George said. Project Anomaly. They selected soldiers with specific cognitive traits and enhanced those traits through a combination of neural modification and specialized training. Jack held up his gloved hands. These aren't weapons. They're interfaces. They link to implants that alter our perception of time and space in combat situations. Mary doesn't aim where a target is, Linda explained. She aims where probability suggests a vulnerability might appear. I don't disable technology by understanding how it works. I create disruptions that have no logical pattern for it to defend against. And Hayes? Miller asked, looking at Jack. Jack's enhancements focus on movement prediction, George said. He doesn't fight the enemy. He fights where the enemy won't expect him to be. Miller shook her head in disbelief. If this technology exists, why isn't it standard for all our forces? Because it kills us, Jack said simply. Neural degradation. The four of us are the only survivors from our group. Most didn't last 5 years after the enhancements. How long ago was that? Miller asked quietly. 30 years, Mary answered. We should have been dead 2 decades ago. We learned to manage the degradation by living quiet lives, using our abilities sparingly. Until today, Linda added. George turned back to the tactical display. The price for what we're about to do will be high. For us, personally. But it's necessary. Miller looked at each of them in turn. What exactly are you planning? The Krenthak adapt quickly, Jack explained. They're already adjusting to our individual abilities, but they've never faced all 4 of us using our enhancements, in perfect synchronization. Option 5 is a coordinated attack, George continued. All 4 of us from different positions creating a cascading series of unpredictable events that their tactical systems can't possibly analyze in real time. It will break their command structure completely, Mary said. Force a full retreat. But the neural load? Linda looked at Jack with concern. Will be significant, he finished for her. We all know the risks. Miller was silent for a long moment. These enhancements, this program, it was hidden from history? The ethical implications were problematic, George said. When the Colonial Defense Force was formed, cleaner methods of space warfare were preferred. Our program was discontinued. Officially, it never existed. Jack checked the time. We have 40 minutes before they attack again. Commander, we'll need your forces positioned exactly as we specify. Miller straightened. Tell me what you need. As the veterans outlined their plan, activity in the colony increased. Troops moved to new positions. Engineers prepared equipment. Everyone worked with new purpose, though few understood the details of what was happening. In the Krenthak command ship, war leader Kraztul studied the human colony with growing frustration. His analysts had no explanation for their earlier defeat. These humans use combat methods outside all known parameters, one subordinate reported. They appear to violate basic tactical principles. They are still humans, Kraztul insisted. They can be defeated. Prepare all remaining forces for a single, concentrated assault. Back in the colony, the 4 veterans made their final preparations. They stood together briefly before moving to their positions. Like old times, Mary said quietly. Let's hope we all walk away from this one, Linda replied. George squeezed Jack's shoulder. See you on the other side, brother. Jack nodded. Just remember, don't push beyond the red no matter what happens. They separated, each heading to their designated position for option 5. As Jack walked alone to his post, he felt the familiar pressure building behind his eyes. The neural implants were already warming up, preparing for what was to come. He knew the cost of what they were about to do, but he also knew the alternative. In the distance, the Krenthak forces began to move. Dawn broke over New Montana for the second time since the veterans had arrived. The air was still, tense with anticipation. In the distance, the Krenthak forces had formed a massive wedge formation. All their remaining troops and equipment were positioned for one overwhelming assault. In the command center, Commander Miller watched the tactical display. The colony's defenders were in position according to the veterans' instructions, though many of the placements made little sense to her conventional military training. "They're moving," an officer reported. Miller touched her communicator. "All units, hold position until ordered. Do not engage without direct command." She took a deep breath. "Veteran team, they're coming." Jack stood alone on a rocky outcropping, with a clear view of the approaching alien force. He wore only light clothing, his special gloves, and a small communication device in his ear. His eyes were closed as he focused his mind, preparing for what was to come. "Acknowledged," he replied, quietly. Option 5 commencing. Half a mile away, Mary lay in position with her rifle. Unlike before, she wasn't aiming at the Krenthak. Instead, her rifle was pointed at a series of small metal reflectors that George had positioned across the battlefield. "In position," she confirmed. Linda was in the colony's main power station, her hands poised over a complex array of switches and controls that she had modified overnight. "Ready," she said. George stood in the command center beside Miller. He held his small tactical device, now connected to the colony's main systems. "All calculations complete," he reported. "Ready on my mark." The Krenthak advanced with confidence. Their defeat the previous day had been analyzed, adjustments made. Their shields now rotated frequencies randomly to prevent the type of shots that Mary had made. Their command structure had been decentralized to prevent easy targeting. Their heavy weapons platforms were shielded against electromagnetic interference. War leader Krastul watched from his command ship, certain of victory. These humans had surprised them once, but the Krenthak always adapted. 3 minutes to optimal firing range, his tactical officer reported. On the battlefield, George looked at the display one final time. "Mark," he said. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, when the Colonial Defense Force officers reviewed the recordings, they had to slow the footage to understand the sequence of events. Linda activated her modified power system. A pulse of energy shot through the colony's grid, but unlike before, it didn't target the Krenthak shields directly. Instead, it created a specific pattern of electromagnetic disturbance in the air above the battlefield. At exactly that moment, Mary fired her rifle. The bullet hit the first reflector, which sent it ricocheting to the second, then the third, creating a precise pattern of impacts. Each impact created a small sonic disturbance. These sonic disturbances interacted with the electromagnetic pattern Linda had created, producing a complex interference wave that rippled across the battlefield in a mathematical pattern that no standard tactical system could have predicted. As this wave passed over the Krenthak front line, Jack opened his eyes. His neural implants activated fully, and time seemed to slow around him. He saw not where the aliens were, but where the interference pattern created momentary vulnerabilities in their formation. Jack moved. To the Colonial Defense Force soldiers watching, he seemed to disappear and reappear at different points across the battlefield. He struck with precise movements, each motion calculated by George's tactical modeling to create maximum disruption. In the command center, George monitored the pattern as it unfolded. "Phase 2, he ordered. "All units fire according to pre-programmed sequence." The colony's defenders opened fire, not aiming directly at the Krenthak, but at specific points around them. The combined effect created another layer of the pattern. The Krenthak formation began to break apart. Their carefully planned advance dissolved into confusion. Individual warriors fired randomly, unable to track the threats that seemed to come from impossible angles. War leader Krastul stared at his tactical display in disbelief. The neat formations of his forces had transformed into a chaotic mess in less than 30 seconds. "What is happening?" he demanded. His tactical officer shook his head. "Unknown, war leader. Our systems cannot analyze the pattern. It appears random, but achieves precise effects." On the battlefield, the 4 veterans' combined abilities created a cascading effect that grew more powerful with each second. Mary's impossible shots, Linda's energy manipulations, George's tactical calculations, and Jack's reality-defying movements formed a symphony of unpredictable actions that the Krenthak's logical, pattern-seeking minds could not comprehend. Jack moved through the alien forces like a ghost, appearing exactly where their defenses were weakest at exactly the right moment. Each movement was perfectly timed to coincide with Mary's shots and Linda's energy pulses. But the strain was becoming visible. Blood trickled from Jack's nose as his neural implants overheated. Mary's hands trembled as she made increasingly impossible calculations for her shots. Linda's face was pale as she pushed her enhancements to maintain the complex energy pattern. In the command center, George gripped the edge of the console, his eyes unfocused as his mind processed tactical data beyond human capacity. After 3 minutes of coordinated assault, the Krenthak began a full retreat. Not just from the battlefield, but from the planet itself. Their ships launched from the surface, abandoning equipment and even some of their wounded. In the command ship, war leader Krazatul made a decision that would change the course of the war. All forces, full retreat from this system, he ordered. These humans do not fight according to any recognizable pattern. They are anomalies. Until we understand, we cannot defeat them. On the battlefield, Jack fell to his knees, exhausted. Mary's rifle slipped from her fingers. Linda staggered against the control panel. George collapsed into a chair, blood seeping from his ears. Commander Miller rushed to the nearest medical team. "Get to the veterans immediately, all of them." Hours later, the 4 veterans lay in the colony's medical center, connected to life support equipment. The colony's doctor looked grim as she reported to Miller. Severe neural degradation in all 4. Their brains show patterns I've never seen before. It's as if they've burned out critical pathways. "Will they survive?" Miller asked. "I don't know. Whatever they did out there nearly killed them." Miller looked at the 4 still figures. These strange, impossible veterans had saved her colony, when nothing else could have. Outside, celebrations had begun as news of the Krenthak retreat spread. Not just from New Montana, but reports were coming in of alien forces withdrawing from other human colonies as well. Something about what had happened here had frightened them on a fundamental level. 3 days later, Jack opened his eyes. The other veterans were awake too, weakened but alive. Miller sat beside Jack's bed. "You did it," she said. "The Krenthak have pulled back from all human territories. They're requesting peace talks." Jack smiled faintly. "Good. The Colonial Defense Force wants to debrief you. They're sending a ship." Mary, from her bed across the room, laughed weakly. "They want to know if there are more like us." "Are there?" Miller asked. George shook his head. "We were the last. Project Anomaly ended decades ago." Linda raised a trembling hand. "But we can still teach. Not the enhancements. Those were unethical. But the principles. Unpredictability. Fighting outside expected patterns." Jack closed his eyes. "The Krenthak aren't evil. They just don't understand humans. They expect logic, patterns. Show them that humans don't always follow patterns, and they'll respect it." Miller nodded slowly. "I'll make sure your recommendations reach the right people." A week later, a small unmarked ship departed from New Montana. Despite offers of medals, positions in the Colonial Defense Force, and substantial rewards, the 4 veterans had asked only for a quiet return to their home. As they prepared to leave, Commander Miller asked Jack one final question. "Why did you come? You knew what it might cost you." Jack looked at the other 3 veterans, his oldest friends, the only people who understood what they had been through together. "Because that's what veterans do," he answered simply. "When called, we serve." The ship disappeared into the stars, carrying the 4 old warriors back to their quiet lives. But across human space, the story spread. How 4 veteran human warriors entered a battle against an undefeated alien force, and everything changed in seconds.